Hey, Doc. Welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. And as per normal, we meet via this Zoom call every Tuesday at noon Eastern time. And our agenda is typically to go through the news of the week for the previous week. Then I try and hit any of the events, webinars, things of that nature that are coming up, and then try and pick a topic that's of interest to me, or oftentimes people write in, suggest topics, which is the case today. So let's jump into the news for the week of October 15th. Okay, One Energy has unveiled the first fully digital substation that's going to be servicing an energy hub near Findlay, Ohio. And this energy hub is designed to start out to provide about 30 megawatts of power, and it is expandable to 150 megawatts. The first tenant of this hub, and I just find this whole thing interesting. Now they're talking about, we've seen corporate facilities, things of that nature, but now they're talking about businesses coalescing around energy production. So this is the first tenant's going to be a currency mining company, like a Bitcoin company. And then there's plans to build essentially a truck stop for the transition for semi-trailers to become electrified. And they're anticipating this facility will be able to charge 90 vehicles at the same time at a 300 kilowatt charge rate. This is being done as a prototype model. They're not using any grants or any utility incentives of any sort. This is a fully privatized venture that is trying to demonstrate that these things are practical and profitable. And it will also be incorporating on-site wind and on-site solar arrays as part of the power generation. So we'll see how that works out here in the coming months. And last month, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, published their annual net zero roadmap report. And it was kind of interesting because they look at how different governments, how different technologies are meeting climate goals. And they made comparisons against past transformative events when it comes to technology adoption and looking at these current trends. So for example, from 1910 to 1920, the adoption of the Model T Ford, it grew at an annualized rate of about 34% year over year. And they saw over that decade a diminishing in cost year on year of about 9% per year. Then during World War II, when the US had to build up an air force to deal with the military conflicts, from 1939 through 1945, that technology grew at a rate of about 75% a year and saw 13% reductions year over year. So we can see that those were two transformative technologies. Well, solar from 2010 to 2020 grew at an annualized rate of about 24% and saw cost reductions year on year at about 18%. So very comparable to these. And then EV battery technology has grown even faster, growing at a 69% annualized rate from 2010 through 2020, and seeing cost reductions of around 19% per year. So that was just an interesting comparison that I saw in that report. Power purchase agreement pricing in the US has dropped for the first time in 3 years. So basically, power purchase agreements are the amount that a utility pays for wholesale electricity, essentially, or large companies like Amazon or Google. It dropped about 1% quarter on quarter. So now solar power purchase agreements are averaging $49.09 per megawatt hour. That's about 4.9 cents per kilowatt hour. Obviously, that's wholesale price. That's what the utility is charging, not what the customer is being charged. For the past few years, we've seen these prices rising, largely because of COVID, where we saw a diminishing install, and then supply chain disruptions as a result of that, and then tariffs that were targeted at Chinese products. So we've seen this price rise in recent years. Now there's this sense that the prices are stabilizing, and the industry experts are predicting that the wholesale cost of solar is going to go down or continue to go down. They credit the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, for this increased build out of utility scale solar, but higher interest rates continue to keep these prices kind of stubbornly high. Now, there was a report by Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. This is a report they call Tracking the Sun. And it was just released, and it basically found that residential solar systems in the US are getting bigger. They're now averaging about 7.2 kW as the average size, and that they're incorporating a lot more battery backup. In fact, about 11% of all of the systems now include battery backup. And they're also becoming a little bit cheaper in price. Now, I know we've thrown out some of the industry surveys that keep talking about solar costing about $3 a watt, fully installed for grid-tied systems. My experience is that's a little bit low, and this seems more in line. They're saying standalone PV systems running on average about $4.17 if there's no batteries installed. This is pre-incentive pricing. And that if you do put storage in there, it's going to kick it up to about $4.92 per watt. Commercial systems, for smaller commercial systems, about $3.21 per watt, and larger systems down around $2.16 per watt for those. And that seems to be in line with what I've seen. All right, that's the news from the solar industry for this week. Does anybody else have anything they want to tack on that you've run across this week? Give you just a moment here. Okay, hearing none, you can always chime in or raise your hand here if you have something. The announcements, there's an Enphase energy webinar this afternoon, the 17th at 3 p.m. This is talking about integrating EV charging systems in with the Enphase systems, the IQ8s. So if you're interested in that, seeing how the charging system works, that will be this afternoon. How do you sell in this marketplace? That's October 19th, 2 p.m. Then there's a clean energy workforce discussion. These things run about 90 minutes long. I've sat through a couple of these. They seem too much like a meeting for me. They ask a lot of polling questions and the like. But if that's your shtick, it's the 19th at 2 p.m. as well. October 24th, there's kind of a back-to-back group of webinars here from SolarEdge. There's closing sales. This is at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And then there's one about how to speed up installations. So these two, one right after the other. Then on the 24th at 3 p.m., there's battery energy systems. I think this is more in line with utility scale systems. So if that's one that's out there. And then SEPA is the Smart Electric Power Alliance. And they're hosting this along with AEP and I don't know how you'd say that acronym, NRECA. It's the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Anyway, this is on grid resiliency planning, and it's the 25th at 2 p.m. Also, the 25th at 2 p.m., there's a webinar that's hosted by Honeywell that's talking about combining batteries in with building management systems. On the 26th at noon, there's one on optimizing or dual land use for large PV systems. And 26th, 2 p.m., this is a Savant energy system. And this sort of keeps up with the trend of we're seeing proprietary whole system solutions, seeing a lot of these companies coming out with their own panels, their own batteries, their own inverters, their own switches, so that you don't mix and match anymore. You're just buying from one vendor. This is one on bitumen and metal flashing. If everything you'd ever want to know about metal flashing, that's on the 26th at 2. The 31st at 2 p.m. is Evervolt Energy Systems. This is, again, another proprietary solution from Panasonic. And then on November 9th at 2 p.m., expanding commercial and industrial sales. So if you're doing residential, you want to get into industrial or commercial, that would be the webinar for you. The November 15th at 2 is a lead talk from the U.S. Green Energy Council. And then, of course, there are always the in-person and online courses that we offer on PV solar training, solar PV training. I got to know what my own website is, solarpvtraining.com. So welcome you to check those out. So those are the announcements. Anybody have anything else that you came up with before we jump into our deep dive subject of the day? Give you just a second there. Nothing like long pauses here. All right, so let me, I'll tell you what the background is on this particular topic that I decided to focus on. And I did get an email from someone who was talking about the fact that they were blocked from putting in ground-mounted solar in their location, and it was a township. The township has actually put in their ordinances that there would be no ground-mounted solar. In fact, I pulled up that particular ordinance here and circled it in there, and basically it says that you can put them on structures, but nothing on the ground, which struck me as kind of curious. I've run into that before, actually with townships as well, and it seems weird in a rural environment that would be something that they're focusing on. I was trying to see what some of the objections are, and there was some discussion in some of these hearings, a concern about safety, that children or animals could somehow come in contact with these solar arrays that are on the ground, and that produces some sort of imminent threat of some sort. In the one article I was reading, they suggested, or the people suggested, well, why don't I put a fence around it? And then they all came back and said, nope, that's not good enough. We're just going to ban it altogether. So I don't know that that's a realistic objection, you know, if that was really the case. Some people said they just don't like the way it looks. How do you get around that? So anyway, that's what we're beginning to see there, even at the local level. So as these bans were beginning to increase, some of the states decided that they had to begin to enact some solar access laws. A lot of these were coming from homeowners associations, where the homeowners association would say, you know, we don't want you to install solar. We're just going to ban it. So these states jumped in and said, no, you cannot unduly restrict people from installing solar on their homes. I think I've got a close-up on that. Nope, I don't. So the states, there are 29 states plus the District of Columbia that currently have solar access laws. And these laws are in place that essentially say homeowners associations, townships, whatever, cannot unduly restrict. Now, what is unduly restrict or unreasonably restrict? What does that mean? Well, I'll touch on what some of the restrictions that have been upheld are, but it's kind of, you know, in the eye of the beholder. There are a number of states that don't have these solar access laws. So if you happen to live in one of those states, you may be out of luck. It may be that they have every right to just say, nope, don't like it. You're not allowed to have that in place. And then another thing that came up, well, before I get into that, there are reasons. I mean, there are good reasons, good legitimate reasons that these homeowners associations or local governments have the ability to prohibit certain behaviors. You know, they want to maintain the property values of the neighborhood or whatever. They want to preserve the look and feel of the neighborhood. Oftentimes people have the same style of houses. certainly in historic districts, in places where there are environmental issues, this is certainly reasonable. I like this picture because, of course, they're going to ban someone from putting solar, but they allowed this utility company to put a big old, pylon right there in the front yard of somebody's poor house. So I was just sort of Googling through looking for, neighborhood eyesores, and that one kind of popped up where that would be quite disturbing. And technically it's on the right of way, but that's definitely a something that I would hope my city would prohibit, but obviously in this case they did not. So what are some of the things that they're allowed to restrict and that are typically restricted when you go before one of these groups? And it is the size of the system. Oftentimes they cited that 10 kW or less was something that they wanted to see. So they didn't want really large systems. The location of the system on the site, very common that they prohibit you from installing solar where it can be seen from the right of way, from the street. So not in the front yard if they allow ground mounted, not on the roof in the front yard, only on the back of the roof. That could be very problematic if your house is facing south, and the road is to the south there. So that can be very, very difficult. Now on the roof only, as these other, the one that prompted this discussion says no ground mounted systems. So we see that fairly commonly, and I still don't quite understand why. Then they can also dictate the type of the solar panel. They don't want it to be glaring off into some neighbor, flashing, reflecting light. You don't want that either as a solar installer. And or they may say it's got to be all black, flat black, so that you don't see the cell type pattern, things of that nature. And then often, very commonly, setbacks. Not only setbacks on the sides of the roof, from the eaves or the top of the roof, but also setbacks for ground mounted systems from the property line. 10 feet is really common when I was looking through some of these where they want these things to be 10 feet from the property line. That would have been problematic here at our offices since the lot is only like 30 feet wide. So 10 feet from either side would be tough. I'm glad they didn't have that restriction here. So Virginia specifically outlined what do they mean by unreasonable. And you see this referenced in a number of places, but they essentially say that if it raises the cost by more than 5%, or if it lowers production by more than 10%, then they would consider that to be unreasonable restrictions. So that at least gives some guidelines. I'm sure there was also a lot of discussion when I was looking at that basically you're dealing in neighborhoods and you don't want to really make your neighbors mad at you so much, in these things. So often these are handled somewhat informally. This map here showed the states where there is some sort of either solar access legislation or solar easement ability to do solar easements. So there are only a handful of states, the ones that are in gray there, that do not have any kind of solar legislation going on that helps homeowners to have the ability to install solar on their homes. A solar easement is essentially, it's like any other easement. It's an agreement with your adjoining property that they will not now or in the future block access to the sun. So that could be that there are trees there and your agreement is that they're going to maintain a maximum height on these trees so that it doesn't block your access to the sun, or they're not going to build any buildings that are higher that are going to block access to the sun. Now, these things don't exist in all states, but it seems like it's a reasonable thing that if you can come up with an agreement, sign an easement. Now, oftentimes, they're giving up something, so they're going to want something in return, and that's all negotiated, how much that's going to cost, whether it's a 6-pack of beer or $50,000. It's all going to depend on the situation. But the other thing to bear in mind is an easement stays with the property. So if you make an agreement with your next door neighbor who you happen to be very, very friendly with, then if they sell that property, the easement remains and it's going to stay there for ever and ever and ever, I guess, under the terms of that agreement. So that's something to consider. And they do talk a lot about people, more and more looking towards solar easements just to protect future access to sunlight. Something to bear in mind if you're installing systems. Maybe you want to get something like that in place if possible. So still very minor, a minority of systems have these, but something that's growing. And then I was curious just how much of an issue this is. We hear about the situations where people are denied. Is this super widespread? Well, there was a study there by Penn State that found that in 2021, reviewing about 2,500 different local ordinances, they found that only about 13% of them even mention solar. So solar is something that is still not on most people's radar. There are a lot of these. I pulled this one up. I think it's Michigan, University of Michigan. They have sample zoning ordinances, sample plans. I really did a scouring of the internet trying to find if there were conservative groups out there like ALEC, the American Legislative Something Council, that were trying to push these bans, or if they were somewhat organic. I couldn't find anything organized. So it struck me that a lot of this is kind of organic in nature, at least at the residential level. People who don't understand solar, don't care for solar, don't really care about solar. And then somebody comes in and complains, and then they just say, yeah, why don't we just ban it? So I don't know that there's a whole lot more thought put into that. So a lot of the focus, and as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, is on the larger utility scale systems, what they're doing to try and stop these on marginal farmland, or not marginal farmland, but on farms primarily. And this is an organized effort. And as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, it really is centered as a Washington, D.C. lobbying kind of thing that's really tied into the power structure of the Republican Party. So that's a different thing. But it was curious to see why all of this is happening, what's happening here, and what states are doing about it. For example, here where you talk about predicted growth, I was focusing a little bit here in the Midwest, but some of these states, when you're looking at states like Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, are really poised to be among some of the fastest growing solar build outs that are going to be happening over the next few years, and especially in the utility scale range. And then what I found here is that at the state and local level, how much local control is being given in the siting of these. And of course, the dark one there, Ohio, is one where they've actually got specific legislation giving local control, almost a veto power on these larger systems. Illinois took the opposite tact, and some of them the rest of them are sort of in the middle there. In fact, here, what happened in Illinois is as they set up these targets to get a lot of industrial solar, a lot of utility scale solar coming into the marketplace, a lot of local counties started deciding they were going to ban solar altogether. There were 15 counties in 2022 that passed ordinances that said no solar in those counties. So the state of Illinois then in January of this year, of 2023, passed what was called House Bill 4412. And essentially they took away any kind of local control on the siting of solar. They essentially said, we have a statewide ordinance essentially on solar power plants, on utility scale, and local municipalities, counties, townships, you don't have any say in this. Caused a big uproar. but has led to quite a lot of solar development within that state. Whereas the state of Ohio took exactly the opposite tact, and they passed law. I think it was Senate Bill 61, and let's see, did I get 61? No, maybe it was 52. I have too many of these bills here. Yeah, Senate Bill 52. It was signed into law, where essentially they gave veto power to the local counties and the local townships. This happened where as soon as this was passed, then these following counties jumped on board to start banning solar. So Seneca, Medina, Logan, Hancock, Allen, Auglaize, Union, Butler, Crawford, and then there are a couple of Knox and a couple more discussing it, plus 40 additional townships. So the Ohio legislature passed this, and then counties started jumping on board, primarily focused on utility scale solar. But curiously, it did not affect utilities. It only applied to non-utility developments. So what they basically call like single seller system. So if I wanted to install a system that sold power to a commercial enterprise, then I would fall under this, and the county could come in and ban it. This was all happening. This bill was passed during the first energy scandal stuff, and it was kind of tied into that. So to recap, the wonderful Ohio first energy scandal, where the legislature, the state legislature, through the Speaker of the House, First Energy funneled in $61 million in essentially bribes. I mean, that's basically what it was. And in exchange, they received a lot of legislative favors, including a $2 billion taxpayer subsidy to First Energy directly, and a number of other things, such as this, where they said, okay, for those people competing with these utilities, we're going to allow counties to shut you down. Now, the Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, he went to prison for all of this, but some of the other players who were involved in that got reelected, promoted, got bonuses. And surprisingly, a lot of these legislation that were part of the scandal were never rescinded, such as this Senate Bill 52. Now, proponents of it claim they're just giving home rule, right? We want local people to have control over their local environment. Therefore, we're going to allow you to veto wind and solar. But the same month, they passed a law that said local governments cannot, under any circumstances, ban natural gas power plants, natural gas pipelines. So essentially, fossil fuels, you're not allowed to argue against at the local level, but wind and solar specifically are part of this home rule movement here in the state of Ohio. So that's basically what I found. Does anybody have any comments on the whole movement, the local access issues here? Give you just a second to comment in on that. Let's see. Bill, are you raising your hand there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, I think this is very similar to the other laws that have enhanced the monopolies and the investor-owned monopolies, in the same way that they had right of first refusal in terms of building transmission lines. It's eliminating power purchase partners or private entities, like you said, single provider entities from competing with local utilities in terms of putting these systems up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, you can argue one way, say it's local control, say it's whatever, but it really is just kowtowing to powerful special interests who are giving you a lot of money. That's sad to say, but it was interesting when I read through the ordinance, the person who had sent it through on the ground mounted system, it was written so poorly, as far as I could see, that they, in their definitions, they were defining structures and saying it was okay to put solar on structures, but not on the ground. But one of the structures that they said was a structure was concrete, just a concrete pad. So if you wanted to put ground mounted solar, as long as you put it on a concrete pad, apparently that was now considered a structure. And I couldn't see why or how they could defend that you couldn't do that. So it just seemed ill-conceived, ill thought out, and poorly executed. So anybody else have any comments on this? Some resource. Oh yeah, somebody's put some resources in chat there. You can access that. All right. Yeah, unless anyone has a comment, I don't have anything else to add. So we can call this one, stick a fork in it and call it done, right? Okay. If you have any suggestions for future topics, let me know. But in the meantime, then I guess I'll see you next week.